it's not directly Thycotic talking about this. We're actually going to be hearing from Lee Morton, who is technical manager. I can't remember your exact title, Lee, sorry. But Lee is working for AlphaGen, who's the Thycotic distributor in the UK, and also the distributor for Hitachi Security Business Group. So Lee has a foot in both camps, so we thought it was an interesting approach to have Lee talk about the integration between the two products and how that might work. So we're very much focused on removing user friction and improving the user experience. And specifically what we want to look at today, for a long time, people have identified individuals by using usernames and passwords. And all of these things are things that people know rather than are fundamentally part of them. And the difference with Vein ID 5 is by using Vein ID 5, we can uniquely identify a person via their finger veins and then authenticate them into whatever technology we want to use beyond that. And specifically now we're going to look at how that might work with Thycotic. So next slide, please, Lee. So as I said, what we do is once the user is authenticated, that information via OpenID Connect or a couple of other different methods is passed on and enables us to sign into the application. The difference being by using the finger veins, we uniquely know that this is actually that person. Hitachi have been doing this for the last 20 years, and we have many.
Your inquiry the other day, so we spoke.
No, can you actually email me the code? Because currently I'm in a meeting. Can you actually email me the code, please?
Okay, it's just I have to run through all the figures and stuff with you. And the only thing is.
Okay, sorry, I was just finding the person who wasn't on mute. There's one sneak through the net. So we're now. So sorry, next slide, Lee. Right. So the way we do that is the user holds up their hand to the laptop camera. Vein ID 5 scans their fingers, creates a unique one-way digital template. From that, this is stored with encryption to ensure it is completely specific to the way that's been captured. We then replay a different template on the way back. So if we're trying to authenticate the user versus what we store in enrollment, and this enables us to complete the verification of the user and ensure that the user is uniquely identified. Next slide, please. So Lee, over to you.
Thanks, Andy. So, as Andy mentions, Thycotic are a vendor that really are kind of a leader in the privileged security space. Everything that Thycotic do has a focus on privileged security with the key real differentiators. So it's a real core value that a customer that employs Thycotic solutions really does get the fastest time to value. Try and make it the easiest to get up and running, to start seeing some value from the solution, having customization options to customize that solution for the customer, but do so in a way that the customer can actually do that themselves if they wish to do so. We also have a real focus on cloud functionality. So first vendor to have complete feature parity across our PAM offering, and any offering that Thycotic look to offer in terms of solutions, there's always a cloud offering available for that. And key also, which is a real differentiator as well, is particularly for customers that really go in with the privileged security, as they progress along their PAM maturity, and they start to add different solutions for different areas of focus for the privileged security, is the entire Thycotic product set has a unified interface experience. So it's very, very easy. There's not a kind of a relearning that has to go on as we kind of utilize other products within the product set. And as a vendor, Thycotic have a worldwide presence with main offices in Washington, London, Australia, thousands of customers across the world, well in excess of 1 million endpoints protected ultimately by Thycotic products. So it's kind of been interesting. I've managed to catch some of the other sessions that have gone on, and we've kind of had quite a focus on identity access management, and so it's quite key to understand when we talk about privilege security that we're often looking at privileged accounts, and they kind of pose a bit of a different threat, and a key differentiator is although some privileged credentials may tie to a human identity, in a lot of cases the privileged credentials are non-human accounts, so they don't have a human identity associated them. It's also as a result quite common that these accounts and credentials may need to be shared amongst multiple individuals, and so it really kind of doesn't fit within standard identity access management, and that's why we have privileged access management, and privileged access management quite often goes alongside identity access management, but it is a different space. So some examples there of immediate non-human accounts that come to mind are things like the default admin account on any switches, routers, firewalls. In a lot of cases these accounts can't be disabled or removed. They always exist. SQL admin accounts, service accounts, and people often underestimate how many accounts like this there are through the estate. But when we start to think that pretty much every single device, every single application pretty much has an initial admin account, and in some cases those accounts don't actually get the password rotated. They sometimes end up in production with the standard published password that ultimately can give the complete access to those systems. It's a real challenge, and it's really a challenge that requires a tool to help implement. And these accounts, given the nature of what can be accessed, what can be done with them, they really are kind of one of the most vulnerable parts of an organization's IT infrastructure. And it's something that attackers and malicious actors actively target. At Black Hat surveys, over a third of Black Hats kind of say, yep, if I get any kind of access, the first thing I'm going to go for is see if I can get hold of some privileged accounts, because it's the easiest way for them to elevate their privileges. They don't, in many cases, see them as particularly well protected, and so the gain and the ease of getting them means it's kind of their number one attack vector. And it probably comes therefore as no surprise that in many investigations of successful breaches, in most cases at least one set of privileged credentials has been partly responsible for that successful breach. And it's not only the actual breach and the access that these credentials give access to, but it's quite often these credentials that allow the criminals to actually get away with their crime. With these credentials, they can often manipulate logs, maybe delete logs, maybe alter login settings, turn off logging, and that helps to contribute to why many breaches take so long before it's actually detected that they've happened. So once we understand that privilege access management, privilege security, really is key and at the heart of an organization's cybersecurity strategy, why is privilege access management actually seen to be so difficult? And a lot of the time, as I said earlier, if we have no tool to help us with this, then it is something that's actually quite difficult. Simply looking at trying to map who actually needs privilege access and what privilege access they require, and keeping on top of that privilege access with new starters and with people leaving, people changing roles. And quite simply, if we start to kind of try and map out which different teams and users we've got and all the different systems that we've got, and try and just draw links to what all of these different teams need access to, and keep on top of that, you just end up with a huge spaghetti mess. And as we know, new systems are coming on board all the time. Users are changing, teams are changing all the time. The access that different teams need is changing all the time. So the more you add to this, just the more exponential this problem becomes. But when we can add privileged access management, when we can have a privileged access management tool like Secret Server, we can really kind of put that between those different teams and users that require the access and the different systems and applications that need to be accessed. And we can have a central point of visibility, a central point of accountability, a central point of auditing, a central point of control. And this is going to allow us to far easily and at any point understand who has access to what systems. It's going to make it very easy to keep on top of that change within these systems, right down to, you know, and a lot of the times, you know, we will kind of map the access according to an external identity provider like Active Directory. So actually, well, we can keep control of the mappings. We get a new user starting. You just need to add them to the right groups, and we'll take care automatically of making sure they've got access to the correct privileged credentials. If we've got a user leaving, then we'll simply, you know, it's a single point that we can say, right, this user doesn't have access to Secret Server anymore. They no longer, therefore, have access to all of the privileged credentials and access that they may have had previously. Same as if they're moving role. Now we're kind of taking access away and giving alternate access. We can do that within the Secret Server. But we can also do a lot of security controls on top, and I'll kind of start to look at those a little bit later. But I also kind of want to look at kind of moving the actual privilege away from the user account itself. So we've kind of got this slide here, which gives us a couple of stages that we've kind of gone through, and we can kind of see as we move along and as we start to implement privileged security, how our kind of security stance improves with that. So kind of starting on the left is, although I do still see it and from time to time, is thankfully something that is increasingly becoming rarer, and that is the very old style of, okay, if I need to have privileged access to a server, to a system, well, my account that I log in as day to day and use for everything else is given those rights. So when I happen to log onto that system, I have the privileges I need, but my account is carrying those privileges all the time and with everything that I do. Means that my account is all over the place, very, very, very high risk. So, you know, we moved on from that and we kind of said, okay, well, let's have an admin account that we can use to log on to these systems, etc. And we'll have a standard user account that user can use to actually log on to their machine, log on to their email, access the internet, etc. So, you know, they can do the privileged stuff with their privileged admin account, and they can do the standard stuff with their standard account. Much better scenario than the first scenario. However, whenever that account is being used, that account is carrying that privilege all the time, and it's not very easy to kind of audit that. It's not very easy to kind of implement security and controls on that account. This user needs to know the credentials of this account at all times, and therefore be able to use. They can use that wherever they see fit. So when we start to implement a privileged access management like Secret Server, we can kind of take that admin account and we can go and lock it away in a secure vault where we know those credentials are protected. We can increase the complexity on any password, and we can kind of make this standard user account have to go and essentially kind of request the access. So, you know, we get to control are you going to have the ability to make use of this credential? If you have the ability to make use of this credential, we are going to audit the fact that you have made use of that credential. We can put extra controls around that. So we literally can say, okay, well, if you want to access this credential, your access needs to be approved by somebody else. Or we can say, okay, because these privileged credentials are often not named, they're not tied to an individual, multiple people could have access to that. So we want to ensure via a checkout option that we know which human was actually acting under that account credential at any one time for accountability and auditing. And because we know that that credential has been used, we actually want to rotate that credential. So every time that's used, it's rotated. That means any hashes that may be still around should get invalidated from that usage as necessary. And we can do a lot of other controls with it as well. But if we start to implement some of the other functionality that Thycotic can offer, so we can use in conjunction something we call Privilege Manager, where we look at least privilege and endpoint protection. And when we use that in conjunction, what that allows us to do is actually say, okay, we're now going to disassociate the privilege rights away from the account itself. So we can still have an account credential in Secret Server that we have all of the controls in place. But now this account is perhaps a local account to that server, and it's just a standard account. So when we log on to that server with that account, the account itself has no automatic privilege, and instead we can define policies and we can look at what that account is being used to actually run and decide, first of all, do we actually want that to run? Do we actually want to allow that process to run? And if we do want to allow that process to run, is this something that actually does require administrative privilege? And if it is, we can grant that administrative privilege to the process/application, not to the user. So the user account itself never carries any privilege, but can be used to perform privilege actions that we deem appropriate. So if we kind of look at an example scenario, and this will kind of lead in as an example of a demo that's kind of going to follow this. We've got Adam on the left, and he's launching RDP sessions, SSH sessions, etc. to various different systems, and in order to do so, he's got knowledge of these privileged credential passwords, and these quite often these will be in an Excel spreadsheet, a KeyPass database, but either way, he's got knowledge of all of these passwords and he's accessing these systems directly. So when we bring Secret Server in, we want to make sure that that access comes through Secret Server. We want to break that direct connectivity and access. And kind of the first step in this is that using password rotation functionality of Secret Server, we want to have these passwords really make sure they are not default, make sure they are conforming to our required password policies, and I ultimately remove this password knowledge away from Adam, so he doesn't need to be using passwords at all to access these systems. So we're going to kind of change those so they're now hidden, and they are going to be securely stored in, all encrypted AES-256 within the Secret Server solution. So now this means that Adam is going to have to access Secret Server, and we can decide whether we're going to grant that access, etc. So he may do this access through the web browser, and in order to do that, he's going to have to provide some authentication and try and claim an identity within Secret Server, so we can map and decide which privileged access he's going to have. What we will then do is, when he's got that access, if he now wants to do these RDP, SSH sessions, etc., essentially we, or Secret Server, is going to give him that session. So in this case, because we are actually providing that session or launching that session on his behalf, Adam no longer needs the passwords for those privileged credentials. We can take that knowledge away from him, and as well as meaning that he's now going to have to come through Secret Server so we can implement all of our other controls that we may want to do, audit all the access, etc. He's not going to be able to, get phished for those credentials. He's not going to be able to provide those credentials to, a member of another team who, shouldn't have access to those credentials. We get so many benefits from being able to do that. And using a privileged access management tool like Secret Server, we're going to be able to rotate those credentials on a much more frequent basis. If this is a service account, service accounts quite often, certainly without a tool, are rarely, if at all, rotated. There's been many organizations where, service accounts existed for 12 or more years and never had the password rotated. It's been known by everyone that's ever passed through the organization. And some of those service accounts, give the highest level of access to certain systems that you could want. So with a tool like Secret Server, we can use Discovery, for example, to go and find these services. That's one of the biggest challenges. If we don't know what that account's being used to run, then if we change the password on that account, we'll have things breaking. But if we can use the Discovery to find that and then make those dependencies to that credential, and then we have the automation of Secret Server to do that rotation and actually take care of those dependencies for us, there's now no reason why we shouldn't be rotating those service accounts. So just an example. And we can send information about the access to these credentials to something like a SIM tool, but we also at Thycotic, we've got privileged behavior analytics where we can monitor for that automatically. We can look at the behavior, we can then spot anomalous activity and start taking action based on that as well. We can record sessions, so there's no reason why this access to privileged credentials couldn't be a third party that maybe manage certain systems, maybe contractors coming in to do certain work. We can give them secure access with no knowledge of the credentials themselves, and we can record that activity if we need to review that or go back on it. And like I say, this is just a handful of things that we can do. But where Vein ID really adds into this value is, at the moment, Adam's still got this kind of password to access Secret Server. And by linking with Vein ID, we can basically say, well, we're going to replace any password to actually access Secret Server with just a hand gesture, just the placing of the hand in front of the camera to read those biometric vein patterns. And now what we've effectively got is Adam has now got access to the privileged credentials that we decide in a controlled and secure manner, and all of that access now does not require any use of a password whatsoever. So that's what we're going to have a quick short video just to demonstrate. So Adam starting is coming to access the Secret Server, and what we're going to see is when he goes to do that access, it's going to redirect him to the Vein ID. Just showing options that he can be flexible with which hand and cameras. And now just putting his hand to the camera. Vein ID is now identified and matched Adam, and has now got access to Secret Server. And within Secret Server, we're now mapping the privileged access, and we can see that he's got access to various different credentials. And just to kind of round that out, if I just quickly access another Secret Server interface to kind of follow on the demonstration. So that is kind of the left hand side of the previous slide with the Secret Server, and then the right hand side, if I wanted to make use of this credential to launch a session, we can kind of see in the pop-out window on the side, I've got nothing here with regards to password, so I've got no password knowledge of this account whatsoever. But I can click into a server and I can launch a session. And in true multi-monitor style, it's actually opened on the other one. But if I drag that across quickly, you can see that that's now logging in to the server. So I've got the same access, but at no point has any password had to be entered at all. Okay. So thank you very much for listening. I'm just going to pass back to Andy.
Lee. Okay, thank you very much. So that was interesting. I think what we really sort of get to see here is how Vein ID 5 can really lift up and start to give us slightly higher levels of proof of identity. I know from conversations we've had with some customers in the US, they were interested in how Vein ID 5 would help them in this environment to authenticate users coming in from a third party, where they suspected the user that was permitted to work on their systems wasn't the user that was actually coming in. And actually what they found was that the person would have been a much cheaper person as well, so they could have saved themselves some money, but actually created some problems and made some mistakes that also needed some rectification. So I don't know if anybody's got any questions for Lee before we wrap up, or for any of our team as well. Okay, so I don't think we've got any questions. So thank you very much for joining. Lee, thank you very much for an excellent presentation.
You're welcome.
Thank you everybody for joining today. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.